Dunblane is found today to be partnered with the Sandy Hook incident in America. And I say incident because there is absolutely no credible evidence to support any claim of the atrocious event having actually ever taken place. Beyond the claims of the corporate establishment, their mainstream media, and a handful of appalling actors paid handsomely for their deceptions and gun control lobbying. If the reader thinks I am being harsh, then go and take a look at these performers, trying to convince us that they are parents of young children that have just been horrifically murdered. There is not one tear to be seen on the face of any of them. Robbie Parker, allegedly a grieving father, left a building laughing and joking with friends before making a statement to the media, literally the day after his daughter Emily was allegedly slaughtered by Adam Lanza. The joviality of his initial demeanour was apparent. His attempt to portray grief once he stepped in front of the camera was, however, far less convincing. Go and look at these parents, who defy lacrimation after the brutal murder of their children. They are all, within days of the alleged event, complacent, accepting of the tragedy, and immediately forgiving of the said shooter, even giving appraisals to Sandy Hook Elementary, the school that failed to protect their children, despite having bulletproof glass that was said to have been penetrated, security cameras that produced no footage to identify the shooter, and it would seem the school had been easily accessible despite having locked security doors with intercom. We do not see heavily grieving parents and traumatized kids asking how on earth could something so horrific like this happen. Instead, they all sing from the same hymn sheet, demanding gun control. So eloquently versed, we are to believe, by the young sister of one of the alleged murdered children, whose letter to then serving US President Barack Obama her tearless father read out on prime-time television.
My daughter Natalie was interested in asking him if he could pass some kind of legislation so that the only people that had guns were military personnel and law enforcement, and if people needed guns for sport, that they could go to a range and the guns would have to stay there.
How easy it would be to prevent any real resistance to violence being carried out against members of the public by a corrupt authority when the only people armed are the vetted members of their politically influenced gangs that we repeatedly see serve the interests of the corporate establishment first and foremost. Those that have not realised this yet really are not paying attention. If one believes that their government, who we know house and protect child rapists and serve the interests of many of the families and corporations thriving today, that previously financed the totalitarian regimes of the likes of Hitler, Stalin, Zedong and Mussolini, with many of them being the same companies that were implicit in the Holocaust for a final solution carried out under the Jesuit-created Third Reich. Those same corporations that also exploited the slave labour of the Nazi concentration camps to build their thriving industries of today, like IBM, Nestle, Coca-Cola, and the leading pharmaceutical and chemical companies of Bayer, Sanofi, Casella, Agfa, BASF, Dow, and the Rockefellers. Granted immunity and given license to monopolise our international markets, their crimes brushed under the carpet as they finance governments and mainstream media, propagated by those who allow their fear and self-interests to feed their ignorance to the extent that they will follow and abide by corporate government dictate without question, as our rights and freedoms are stripped from us. It has to be said that such an individual cannot honestly say that they have a deep-seated care for the welfare and safety of anyone beyond their own false sense of security. Otherwise, they would not allow themselves to be led by a corporate establishment which has repeatedly shown that profit will always come before the people, with the few that accumulate the world's stolen wealth and resources being served by the masses, who accept being governed by a plutocracy.
The good news is the elite across the world trust each other more and more, so we can come together and design and do beautiful things together. The bad news is that in every single country they were polling, the majority of people trusted that elite less.
Under the current system, it will always be the will of the minority and not the majority. And in order for them to sustain this dominance over the planet, they need to safeguard their own security from any chance of resistance or reprisals from a waking world. It is therefore our willful ignorance and fear-fueled obedience to their dictate that will create the negative energies in our lives, that will manifest unwanted outcomes on either side of our exit doors if we aid in their crimes. 26 children are said to have been gunned down by Adam Lanza on the 14th December 2014 in Newtown in the US state of Connecticut. And though there is not a scrap of plausible evidence that proves the nightmare event ever took place, the name Sandy Hook is etched in our minds like Columbine and Dunblane, and chanted as a reason to impose tighter restrictions. Despite the majority of gun crimes we know to be generally committed with illegal, unlicensed and unregistered firearms. It has to be noted here that the gun control platform is not lobbying for the safety of the millions upon millions of innocent men, women and children killed and maimed by the military-industrial complex, with many of those surviving being left with their lives in ruin because they were made subject to the orders of military personnel, serving whatever political agenda is advocated at that time by the same corporate establishment that want to disarm its people. Soldi is the Italian word for money, and soldiers, or soldiers, are nothing more than expendable collateral for the elite to spend in the interests of their world dominance and control. Sorry to break the illusion here, but there is absolutely nothing heroic or patriotic in being hoodwinked by a corporate establishment to risk your life in order to murder and maim others in orchestrated wars that we find, just as during the First and Second World War, are financed on both sides by many of the same banks and corporations, or being sent overseas as an invading army to democratize another country that either will not accept the authority of the Crown in refusing the control of a private central bank over their country, or is attempting to break free from the power of the Rothschild, the treasurers of the Vatican banks. I myself hired a 9mm Glock at a gun club in New Orleans, in the American state of Louisiana back in 2010, spending an enjoyable afternoon with a good friend shooting paper targets there. And you know, at no time did that pistol, or any of the guns in anybody else's hands, become possessed of its own free will and turn on any of us. No such activity even entered my mind, and I am sure no one else's, to use the firearm to initiate a bloodbath. Because, like the driver of a truck or car, who could just as easily drive at high speed off the road and plough into a group of people, we entertained no such thought of carnage. However, I do agree fully that it is the deranged, homicidal maniacs that we have to safeguard against, which itself is an argument against gun control, as we repeatedly see that it is within the very same corporate establishment that the gun control lobbyists argue should maintain absolute authority over all gun rights, that we find the most despotic and cold-blooded killers. This silly argument that we need to disarm the public because guns kill people is so often the common rhetoric of many of those that refuse to question authority fully, fearing the responsibility of self-governance in a truly lawful society. A knife, a car, even your bare hands can kill someone, and it is this appendix of the human body that controls the gun, the knife, and the car. And I would joke here, do we ban people? But the eugenicists are already working on that ludicrous postulation with their desperate attempt to depopulate the earth. Problem, reaction, solution. The problem is orchestrated, the reaction controlled, and the solution was the objective from the very start.